Welcome to the Max Future Weekly Podcast. All Apple talk and no chit chat.
Okay, welcome to episode 118 of the Apple Podcast. This is Lex at Max Future, and today is the day before WWDC. It's Sunday, June 10th, 2012. 6/10/2012, and this is a chit-chat free podcast all about Apple-related stuff. And so let's get to it. And of course, you can support this podcast by giving it a positive review in the iTunes store, or going and checking it out on YouTube under Max Future, or go to maxfuture.com, or look on it on Blip TV, or under Apple Things in iTunes, or hear the iPad podcast that also comes out on iTunes and those other channels. So thanks for listening, and let's get to it. Okay, let's get to it. And so I think I want to start off the show by talking about WWDC, which is starting tomorrow, and there's going to be a big keynote speech probably tomorrow, and a lot of stuff is going to be announced. This is the worldwide developers conference that Apple has every year, and I think there's a lot of excitement over what's going to happen this year. I mean, this is the full first year WWDC has Tim Cook as the CEO of Apple. And remember, Steve Jobs died last year on October 5th, which was the day after the iPhone 4S was launched. And so this is a really big event for Tim Cook as well as Apple and the whole Apple community. And, you know, there's a lot of things that are going to come out. So let's first talk about something that we're pretty sure is going to come out, which is iOS 6. At least it's going to be announced to developers. It's the next operating system for the iPhone, the iPad, and the iPod Touch. And most likely what's going to happen is that the SDK, that's the toolkit for creating stuff that works with the operating system, is released to developers. And the question is, what's going to be in iOS 6? And so I came up with my own predictions, and these are some predictions other people have also had. So let's go through the predictions. So what are going to be the key features in iOS 6? I think there's going to be Apple. I mean, there's been leaks about this. Apple is now going to have its own mapping service. Apple's no longer going to be relying on Google for Google Maps as part of the operating system, And up till now, developers who want to have maps in an app that's released on the iPhone or iPad or iPod Touch have to use the Google Maps that's sort of built into the operating system. And Apple, has an uncomfortable relationship with Google. Google used to be an ally. When the iPhone first came out, Google was an ally. But now they're not allies anymore because Google is competing with Apple by, having the Android operating system out there that hardware competitors of Apple are using to compete with the iPhone and the iPad. So the word is that Apple's going to release its own mapping service, and it's going to have some sort of killer 3D feature. And it's going to have APIs for developers to use. And this is bad news for Google because Google gets a lot of its mobile map traffic from Apple's iOS devices. I read an article somewhere, something like half of all the traffic it gets to Google Maps comes on the mobile platform comes from the iPhone or iPad Touch or iPod. So this is something that's going to come out probably tomorrow. Apple has acquired at least like 3 companies that are in this sort of digital mapping service. And apparently one of the big features of this mapping service Apple's going to have is incredible 3D graphics of like buildings and monuments and stuff like that. So this would be interesting to see because a lot of people say, look, Google's Maps is the gold standard right now. So Apple's going to have to do a really great job with its mapping service if it wants to convince consumers and developers that, it's better than Google. So this is something that's going to be watched closely. And I have a feeling Apple is not going to release something unless it really feels it can wow, the press, the public, consumers, developers, and say, look, Google, we can do a better job. Now, last week, Google hastily arranged a press conference to talk about the future of its mapping service. Obviously, Google got wind that, through the leaks, that Apple's going to have a big announcement tomorrow regarding Google, 3D maps. And Google is, I think, a little afraid. So people who went to this press conference and who reported on it basically said there was nothing really new announced. It basically sort of praised the Google Map product and basically said that, there's going to be 3D coming out in the future. So Google's, I think, kind of scared about what Apple's going to do. But, Google, if you want to compete with Apple directly, you're gonna have these issues, because, it's sort of touche from Apple, right? Because Apple, particularly Steve Jobs, felt that Apple got screwed by Google back when Android was launched. Apple and Google were pals in an alliance almost against Microsoft. And then I think Steve Jobs felt he got sort of stabbed in the back by Sergey and Larry and Eric Schmidt over at Google. Eric Schmidt was on the board of Apple at the time that Apple was developing the iPhone. And then all of a sudden, Google comes out with Android, and the Android operating system, sort of has the look and feel of the iOS operating system. And Google suddenly helping Apple's hardware competition in the smartphone market compete against Apple. And of course, we know there's been all these lawsuits. It's been crazy. Anyways, I'm digressing because the issue is, what do I expect is going to be in iOS 6? So 3D maps, there's already been leaks about that. I'm pretty sure that's going to happen. So what I would like, though, is for iCloud to have Dropbox-like file access. Last year, Apple announced iCloud, and iCloud basically is a cloud service for developers to use and for Apple's apps to use. And the way it works is this. It's all like, right now it's limited to, let's take Pages, right? So if you have Pages on your iPhone or iPad, that's the word processing document application, and you create a document, well, that document can be backed up to your iCloud account. And so the document will then be available on iCloud. And the idea is that eventually it'll be working with Pages on the Macintosh, so that if you have the Pages word processing application, just within Pages, you will have the same document. So the idea is you're no longer looking in a folder or file somewhere for the document. So what Apple's trying to do is get rid of the whole folder file structure, because look, on an iPhone or iPad there is no file structure. There are folders that hold apps, but you don't have folders that hold files that that you can access like you can on a traditional computer. But the thing is, Apple's vision of iCloud is kind of limiting, right? Because right now, the way it works is, let's take Byword. Byword is an iPhone, iPad app, also a word processor. And there's a Macintosh version of Byword. And they work well together, so that if you create a Byword document on the Mac, it's available in Byword on the iPad. But here's the limiting part. What if I create a Byword application on my Mac and I want another app to have access to it on the iPad? In other words, not Byword. And Byword can create text documents. I think it can export and create Word documents, etc. So you can't do that, but you can with something else, and that's Dropbox. And Dropbox up till now has been sort of the de facto cloud syncing app on the iPad and the iPhone and on the Macintosh, in fact, frankly, on any computers. And Dropbox is not limited to these devices, it's across the board. And there's other cloud services now like SkyDrive from Microsoft, Google Drive, there's just a whole bunch. There's Cubby cubby by Log Me In, which is on the iPhone, iPad, and also the Mac. So there's a lot of cloud services, but Dropbox has been the standard. And one of the reasons it's been the standard is that it has open APIs. So for example, Dropbox, the app on your iPhone or iPad, if you have that on your iOS device, other apps can access them through a Dropbox API and open files that are in Dropbox. So it's a great way to share documents across different apps on the Mac and on the iOS devices. So what I think Apple's going to do is make this available to other apps. So I could see building into iOS 6 that you can give permission to different apps to have access to your iCloud account, and then have access to pages, documents, or any other files that you've stored in iCloud. So I have a feeling that Apple, and I hope they do, because otherwise I think they're going to have a hard time competing with Dropbox. But they could kill Dropbox if they make it easy to share files across different apps through your iCloud online setting. So, for example, wouldn't it be great if you create a movie, an iMovie, and share it and save it on iCloud, and then you can open it, let's say it's just a movie file, you can then open it in another app on your iDevice and edit it and save it, which is sort of like on the Mac. So the model would be similar to Dropbox in the sense that you could give permission to different apps to have access to the files that are in another app. Now, obviously Apple has given permission to this concept because it allows Dropbox to do this, right? Because Dropbox is an app well, actually, no. Actually, Apple has not given access to Dropbox to do this. What Apple has done is given apps the ability to access online accounts like Dropbox. So really what's going on is your app is accessing the files. I think they're accessing the files not on Dropbox on your iPhone or iPad, but in the cloud. So you know what? Let's do a little experiment. I could shut off all internet access on my iPhone, and then let's see if I can open an app that accesses Dropbox, and let's see if it can access the files that are on Dropbox on my iPhone. So I don't think it's going to work. Let's see. All right. So what apps let's see. I have a writing app. Okay. So this is a little experiment now as we talk, which is let's see if we can sync to Dropbox when we're not connected to the internet. And this will be sort of my sync now. Let's see what happens. No. Okay, so it says internet connection not available, cannot connect to Dropbox.com. So Apple basically hasn't given third parties the right to access the Dropbox app on the iPhone or iPad. Rather, Apple has given third-party apps the ability to access Dropbox on the internet. So Apple could do the same thing. Rather than having app-to-app access, Apple could give developers the ability to have open APIs. So that, or give you the ability to give permission to an app to, access all files in your iCloud that are stored. You see, because right now it's all limited, right? It's limited iCloud so that a Pages app can be opened by a Pages document app on the Mac, but you don't have cross opening. So Byword can save a file and be opened by Byword on the Mac. But what if you want Keynote to open a Byword document or Pages to open a Byword document through iCloud? So anyway, so that's something that I'm hoping for. Okay, next, Siri APIs. Now Siri is the voice recognition and the sort of talking robot that answers questions on the iPhone 4S. And I think that Siri is going to be upgraded, right? So I think Siri is definitely going to be expanded and might even come to the iPad 3rd generation, maybe the 2nd generation iPad. Right now, voice dictation's in the 3rd generation iPad, but it doesn't have the Siri part where you say, Siri, help me find this, or Siri, help me find that. I'll give you a little demonstration.
Siri not available.
Siri not available.
Connect to the internet.
Siri's not available because I put myself in airplane mode. Okay. So the cool thing about Siri is that, you can, here, I'm going to say, Siri, tell me what the weather is. And Siri will come back.
Here's the forecast for today through this Friday.
So you see, Siri's sort of like a little robot. So I think what Apple's going to do to upgrade Siri is it's going to put it on the iPad, maybe even the 2nd generation iPad, and maybe the regular iPhone 4 as well as the iPhone 4S. But I also think it's going to create what are known as APIs. APIs will allow Siri to be used by other apps. So how cool could it be if you can control all apps that have Siri integration in them? So, for example, I don't know, you open the Twitter app and you can tell Siri to do stuff, like email something, or let's say you're using GarageBand and you could say, Siri, you could say record, or play that back, or some other command. In other words, right now you can do voice dictation into any app that has the keyboard, but you can't control any app with commands. And I bet you Apple's going to create Siri APIs where developers are going to be able to create commands to run their apps that Siri recognizes. So I think that's something to look for in the WWDC tomorrow. All right, the other thing that's been leaked big time is that there's going to be Facebook integration in iOS 6, similar to what we have now with Twitter integration. So if you go into settings now for the iOS 5, Twitter is a setting so that you can have it's right under the Mail app in the settings. So it's a big part of the integration, and Apple's going to do that because Facebook is really popular. Now, to one extent, Facebook is competing with Apple to some extent, right? There's rumors of a Facebook smartphone coming out. But I think it's actually clever for Apple to have Facebook integration because a lot of people use it, and it would really piss off Google, right? It would threaten Google because Facebook is also an enemy of Google. They're competing for ad business, right? Google is more sort of natural search, while Facebook is, the social graph, taking all the information from the 800 million supposed accounts that are on Facebook. So Apple's going to have integration like Twitter into iOS 6 for Facebook, which will mean that you'll be able to log into Twitter in your account settings on the general settings for the iPhone. And then apps will be able to take advantage if you give it approval to your Facebook account. Now, why would Apple do this? Why would Apple allow Facebook to be integrated in it when it's already in somewhat competition with Facebook? And remember, Facebook last year was going to be part of Ping, and then Apple and Facebook had a falling out, and so there is no easy way to integrate right now Ping, which is the music social service that Apple created for music and iTunes and Facebook. And Ping is kind of a failure, right? Not a lot of people use it. So why is Apple doing this? Well, one, Facebook is very popular, so it gives you an edge over Android, because I don't think Android's going to be integrated into Facebook the way Facebook is going to be integrated into iOS. So it's a way to compete against their natural enemy, Google. But also, I was thinking about this, it's kind of clever of Apple, because then if Facebook is heavily integrated into iOS, and Facebook users love having Facebook all over the iPhone and heavily integrated, Facebook has to be careful about competing in other ways with Apple. Like if Facebook came out with a smartphone, what if Apple said, fine, you want a smartphone? We're going to get rid of Facebook integration in the iOS. And that could hurt Facebook big time, because the question is, who are people more loyal to, Facebook or their iPhone? So it's interesting, because I think a lot of and also it's a way to wean Facebook users out of Facebook, because if Facebook is integrated into other apps, then people are used to other apps and not just the Facebook app in doing things. And if they're, so it's a way to wean people who are on Facebook all the time off Facebook into other apps that are on the iPhone, and so they become psychologically more committed to the iPhone iOS format than just a plain Facebook interface. So I think it's kind of clever of Apple to seduce this enemy of my enemy. Okay, here are some more practical things that I think we need in iOS 6 is better text editing. Someone on the internet had done a sort of a demonstration of a better way. One better way is when the keyboard pops up, to just sort of glide your finger across a row of keys, and then that would move the cursor across the words. The problem now is that if you want to edit a word, you have to go to the actual word with your finger and select the text. And if you're typing a lot, that means you got to lift your fingers off the keyboard on the iPhone or iPad and go and select the text. So it'd be nice if you could just sort of quickly find some other way. You don't have arrow keys that allow you to quickly navigate up and down on the iPhone screen without going with your finger. So for just sort of typing, that's not ideal. I mean, this could all be moot once voice dictation is perfected so that it's actually faster than typing and more accurate. But anyways, so maybe they'll come up with a better way to do text editing. Folders within folders. Now, this is something that I've seen in the jailbreak community for the iPhone and the iPad, and that is the ability to tweak your iPhone so that you can put folders of apps within other folders, which is great, but it's the kind of complexity that maybe Apple doesn't want. Remember, that's what you can do on a traditional desktop or a notebook computer. You can have folders within folders, but then it gets kind of complicated. Now, Apple could still limit the folders like it is now on iOS to apps, but it is kind of nice to be able to organize folders within folders. For example, you might have a folder called video, but then have subfolders be things like kids videos or documentary videos, that sort of thing. So maybe that's a tweak. I mean, it can be done because the jailbreak community on Cydia or CYDIA, when you jailbreak an iPhone, you can get a setting or some sort of jailbreak tweak that does folders within folders. The other thing that you might see is an increase or unlimited apps within folders, because right now you're limited to a maximum number of apps in a folder. On the iPhone, it's pretty limited. Let's see, my photography app, I think it's 4 by 3, so I think you can have 12 apps all together in a folder. And so, actually, no, 12 apps, I think, or is it 16 apps? It's either 16. Let's see if I add. I'm going to try dragging another one into. Let's see. into my folder. No, it's 16. So on the iPhone, it's 16, and I forget what it is on the iPad. But I've seen jailbreak tweaks where you can increase and I think put like hundreds and hundreds of apps into a folder. And if you're someone like me who's got like hundreds and hundreds of apps, it is kind of annoying that you're limited because, for example, I have more games than you can put in one folder. So now I've created a folder called Games 1 and then Games 2 and then Games 3 to hold all the different games. And it would be nice to just dump them all in one folder. Now, swiping between apps, we have that on the iPad where you can do the four-finger swipe, and it would be nice to have that on the iPhone. So it would be nice to see the iPhone have the ability to swipe screens between a current app and then the last app that you used. So that way, let's say you could, if you had just used the browser, Safari, and then were in a Word document and you wanted to go back to Safari to read something you looked up, you could just swipe back and forth. Right now, you have to double click to get the the prior app tray that's at the bottom, and that's like an extra step from just swiping between apps. So that's something that maybe Apple will borrow from the jailbreak community and put into iOS 6. Activator-like triggers. Now, one of the great things that you can do with your iPhone if you jailbreak it is install this thing called Activator that's in your settings, and you get it for free if you buy the display recorder program. And what that does is it allows you to trigger all sorts of things from different gestures on the screen or from double pressing the home button or the sleep button or even I think the camera button. And you can do stuff like say you could change the settings so that if you double click the home screen or triple click it, it'll launch a certain app. So if there's an app you use all the time and you want to get to it quickly, you could just use the Activator settings to launch that app. Now, again, here's the tension. The tension is Apple's trying to get away from complexity because complexity is not a good common denominator to sell to a mass market. On the other hand, this is a great tweak that a lot of people would like. So maybe Apple can say, if you want to, you can add these tweaks in there. I mean, right now there are all these tweaks that you can do if you're, handicapped and you need a larger, type or voice, a voice sort of dictation of whatever you do. And that's the accessibility setting. And so a lot of people don't use that, but if you're handicapped, you do. So maybe Apple will create like an Activator-like feature where you can use all sorts of triggers. Like with Activator now, if you swipe left or swipe diagonally, you can make that trigger something. So that's something else that would be nice. One thing that I would like to see is get rid of the fix the network pop-up thing, because I often leave Wi-Fi setting on, and when I leave my home, I'll go by other networks, and the iPhone will ask me if I want to join those networks, and I really don't. So I'm constantly, saying no, I don't, or I'd have to shut off my Wi-Fi. Also, sometimes I activate, the email, and I want to look at my old email. But then what happens is, if I'm not connected to the internet, let's say I'm on the subway, it'll pop up and say, this account can't connect to the internet because there's no internet connection. But I know there's no internet connection. I just want to look at the emails that are already downloaded. So I'd like that to be fixed because that's really annoying. I would like you to be able to have a setting that says I don't need to be told that there's no internet connection when I open the Mail app. I mean, just toggle that off because I know I have no internet connection. I just want to read my mail, but I don't want something that constantly pop up to say you're not connected to the internet. Now, this other thing would be cool too, geolocation for Wi-Fi. Now, Marco Armand, who has the Instapaper app, showed that you can use geographic location with your iPhone to trigger, or your iPad to trigger certain actions. So for the Instapaper app, you can say, like, when the iPhone senses that you're home, it will try to like download the latest version of the Instapaper documents or Safari or the web pages that you've saved. But what would be nice is to have geolocation for Wi-Fi. So basically, I could tell the iPhone or iPad, if I have the GPS version, to say, look, when I leave a certain geographic perimeter around my house, shut off the Wi-Fi. And then when I get close to work, if I have Wi-Fi there, put back the Wi-Fi. So in other words, you don't have to do it manually. And so that would be nice to create, actually it would be nice if all sorts of apps could take advantage of geolocation to do certain things. I mean, maybe you could have a default email be in the email app that sends an email to your home when you're close to it that says, "Daddy's almost home," or "Daddy's like a block away," or a text. You could have like text that would be sent, standard text that you could say, whenever I'm at this geolocation, you want the following text to be sent. And it could be text to your family that says, "Hey, I'm just around the corner. Do you need anything?" Often before I'm home, I ask my family, my wife, I say, do you want me to pick up anything before I get home? So, but this geolocation with Wi-Fi, that would be huge. And so hopefully we'll see not only that, but other APIs to take advantage of the powerful geolocation of the iPhone and iPad. Finally, I think Apple should allow video screen recording. Right now, you can do a screen capture picture just by pressing the sleep button and the home button at the same time. Everyone knows that captures a photo of your screen. But you can't do video screen recording unless you jailbreak the iPhone or the iPad. And this is really annoying because I'm sure a lot of people want to do little tutorials that show people how to use certain apps. And right now, you have to jailbreak your iPad or iPhone or mirror it using HDMI to a computer that can then screen record the mirror that's coming in. But it would be nice to just do it natively on the iPhone or iPad. And I use Ryan Petrick's display recorder app on the jailbreak store of Cydia, which is great. But at some point, Apple is going to allow video screen recording as the hardware gets more and more powerful, and Apple's not concerned it will somehow degrade the experience of the user. But I think it's already powerful enough because I use Ryan Petrick's display recorder app, and I don't feel like my experience is degraded in any way. So that's something else we'll see. In the email, one of the things that I find very frustrating is you can't set up group emailing. It would be nice to just set up in the Mail app, hey, I'm going to create a new group and I'm going to name it, and all I have to do is type the name of that group, and then all 3 or 4 or 5 people get the email. Because right now you can't do that. You have to use third-party apps that are Mail apps, and I don't even know how good they are. And Apple should have that built into to the email for the iOS devices. So that's something else that I'm hoping will come. Now, we know this is coming, which is offline Safari Reader. Now, Safari Reader is sort of like Instapaper in the sense that you can tag certain web pages or articles you're reading on the web into your reader area of Safari on the iPhone and the iPad, and then you can go and read them. But if you're offline, you can't read them. Now, supposedly in the next version of Mountain Lion and also probably of iOS 6, you're going to be able to do offline reading. So this will be great because you could tag a whole bunch of Safari articles and then read them when you're on a plane and don't have connection to the internet. and it will cache them. You could have the option of caching it on your iPhone or iPad. So I think that's going to come. There's sort of been leaks about that. That's going to further compete with the paid app of Instapaper and other apps that do similar things. Now, Instapaper would still have a head start because with Instapaper you can create subfolders and things like that, which gets me to the next point, which is the Safari reader should have folders. Right now there are no folders. It's just all the articles that you save. In Instapaper, you can save in all sorts of folders, and it's a great way to do research off the internet and save articles by subject matter in different areas for different uses. So maybe Apple will copy that from Instapaper and then have that there. Now the other thing Instapaper has that Safari Reader does not is that it has an open API. So what's great is that a lot of apps like Twitter apps like Tweetbot, if someone sends you a link in a tweet to something to read, right from that link you have the ability to save that link directly to Instapaper. So it's a great way, having this open API is a great way to save a whole bunch of articles to Instapaper. So maybe Safari will do that at some point and allow an open API so that like Tweetbot could save a link to your Safari Reader account. So there's a lot of things that Apple can do to copy from other third-party developers, and that's always a risk for anybody who's a third-party developer. Which goes to my next point, which is Safari Reader APIs, which is exactly what I was talking about. Now, the other thing that would be very cool is if Apple copies something that Microsoft is going to do with Windows 8, which is have the ability for apps to communicate with other apps. And Microsoft calls them contracts. So it'd be great if, for example, the Tweetbot app could share certain data with another Twitter app because the developers made their apps open to sharing with other apps with an open API. Now that doesn't really exist now. I mean, there's that perception a little bit with Dropbox, but Dropbox, even if it's on your iPhone, is not directly sharing stuff with other apps. Rather, other apps are going to Dropbox's cloud storage on the internet and getting the data. So it's not being done app to app. All right, let's go to the next subject. All right, so the next thing that could be a big story at WWDC are new Macs. The Macintoshes haven't had an upgrade for, I think, about a year. I think the MacBook Airs were the last things to be upgraded last summer. I think around, July or August. And things like the iMac, things like the MacBook Pros, things like the Mac Minis, things like the Mac Pros the Mac Pros haven't been upgraded in a long, long, long time. So one thing I think Apple's going to do is upgrade all of them in one fell swoop. And I think they're going to do it. I wouldn't be surprised if they do it at WWDC, just because it would be just such big news. But I also think upgrading them all at one time makes sense from their business and financial reporting point of view, because Apple's a public company, and its stock price is very high, and it's on a lot of pressure to perform and have its profits grow. And I don't know if you remember, but last year Apple moved the launch of its iPhone upgrade from WWDC to October. So that changed the upgrade path for the iPhone from one fiscal quarter to the quarter that starts October 1st. And so what happened was a lot of the analysts, who had been thinking that there was going to be a new iPhone in June, they overprojected what Apple's profits were going to be that quarter. And Apple didn't meet analysts' expectations, but met its own projections. But still, the stock price suffered. So I think Apple, though, has an incentive now to really launch all the Macs in this quarter, because there's probably not going to be an iPhone upgrade this quarter. and Apple needs to show profit growth to keep Wall Street happy. Now, we had the iPad 2 come out in the quarter that is ending June. It's the quarter ending. Oh, actually, no. Now that I think about it, I think Apple's instead going to launch the new Macs not in June, but in July, because the current quarter is comprised of April, May, and June, and the new iPad came out in, I think, end of March, April. And so Apple already has a huge product, iPad 3, that is selling like hotcakes because of an upgrade path in this quarter. And Apple needs something really for the quarter that is July, August, and September. So one way to do it is to announce all new Macs. Now, on the other hand, we're in middle of June. So it would help boost a little bit of June's fiscal quarter, but also, there'd be a lot of Macs upgrading a lot of people upgrading to new Macs in July, August, and September when it's back to school. So anyways, I do think we're going to see new Macs upgrade, all new Macs, but let's see what they could be. So obviously the hottest Macintosh, the one that's I think the biggest seller, is the MacBook Airs. And what are we going to see? Well, I think we're going to see, let's go back. I think we're going to see maybe a 15-inch MacBook Air. Right now we have a 13-inch and an 11-inch MacBook Air, and I think maybe Apple will come out with a 15-inch MacBook Air. But also, I think Apple's going to upgrade the SSDs. These are a key part of the MacBook Airs. They don't use traditional hard drives. They use solid-state drives, and they go very fast. But one of the frustrating things is that Apple has been using older generation SSDs, even though the hardware, including the current MacBook Air, can handle, actually this slide should be 6G SSD. Here's the bottom line. There are SSD drives that can now read and write at 500 megabytes per second. And you can buy such an SSD from Otherworld Computing and put it in a 2011 MacBook Air and get double the read-write speeds of the SSDs that Apple is using in the current generation MacBook Airs or current generation MacBook Pros. So all Apple has to do is just supplying faster SSDs, which are out there in the market, and it'll just double the read-write performance of the MacBook Airs as well as the MacBook Pro. So I think they're going to tweak the line that way because it's so easy to do. Of course, we're going to see the faster processors because the latest Intel processors are going to be put in there. And that's great. Processor speed is great for things like video, crunching. But really, in the end, it's the RAM and these SSD drives that increase everyday performance. And we'll probably see more storage in the MacBook Airs. Now, what I would like to see in the MacBook Airs is the option to buy it with a cell data connection from one of the carriers like Verizon, AT&T, or Sprint. Right now, if you want your MacBook Air to have connection to the internet through a cell data connection, you have to go either buy a USB stick from Verizon, Sprint, T-Mobile, or AT&T, or use a Wi-Fi hotspot. Like, for example, the iPad 3rd generation can be turned into a Wi-Fi hotspot. But it would be nice, particularly as the MacBook Airs are such mobile devices, if they had the ability to have a built-in cell data chip like the iPads do. And also, I think they're going to be upgraded, the MacBook Airs, to have USB 3.0. That's the latest version of the USB type of connection. And right now, none of the Macs have anything other than USB 2.0 and, let's say, FireWire or Thunderbolt. Right now, the MacBook Airs just have Thunderbolt, which is very fast. and it's much faster than USB 3.0, but there's not a lot of devices out there. There's not a lot of like hard drives that like use Thunderbolt and connect to the MacBook Air. And USB 3.0 is more, more widespread. So this can have huge, and it's very fast. I think USB 3.0 gets speeds of, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of megabytes per second. So you could take a fast SSD that writes at 500 megabytes per second and have it connect via USB 3.0 to your MacBook Air. And frankly, it could boot and run the MacBook Air through the external drive, and it would just seem just as zippy with something like USB 3.0. So I think we're going to see that coming. And how about the new MacBook? Well, one of the rumors is that Apple's going to have a whole new line called not MacBook Pros, but just MacBook. Like there used to be a MacBook, which was sort of like a more consumer model. And so Apple may sort of split the baby and bring back that consumer model, and it might be in weight somewhere between a MacBook Air and a MacBook Pro. And I think one of the key features is it's going to be thinner and lighter than the MacBook Pros, but maybe not as thin and light as the MacBook Airs. But the other key thing, it'll have no DVD drive. The DVD drives are a dying breed, and frankly, they take up too much internal space in computers, particularly portable computers, so they're kind of a waste. So it'll probably have no DVD drive, and it'll probably give you the choice of an SSD or a hard drive. So why would it give you a choice of a hard drive? Because hard drives are still very cheap, and it might be a way to get the price down by having a MacBook that has a hard drive. Now, this is particularly important because a lot of schools were buying the old MacBooks, which were priced at like $800 or on discount. And Apple really wants to dominate the education market. And it could. What if it came out with a MacBook that weighs more than a MacBook Air, let's say a 13-inch one, but doesn't cost $1,200, that costs $800, has no DVD drives, with a hard drive can be bought, let's say, for $800 or $750, but gives you the option of putting an SSD. That would sell like hotcakes and would really hurt the competition. And of course, they would also have USB 3.0 and Thunderbolt connections. But also, Apple's probably going to upgrade and keep the same configuration of the MacBook Pros, bump up the processors, add USB 3.0, and of course, have the the faster SSDs in them. And what about the iMacs? Well, the new iMacs are coming, and they're going to be bumped up with faster SSDs. They're also going to have faster processors and USB 3.0. So, and also they'll have a lot more storage. And then, of course, the new Mac Pros. They haven't been upgraded in a long time, and they'll probably have processors with many more cores. I think the most now you can get is 12, so maybe it'll go up, to whatever Intel's latest high-end processor cores are. And it'll be Thunderbolt and USB 3.0. And of course, the Mac Minis will be upgraded with faster processors, the same thing. But before we leave the Macs, I want to discuss one more thing. Okay, so what could be this one more thing that's going to be huge about the Macs that Apple's going to probably announce? And that is Retina Displays. I think Apple, and there's been rumors about this, and there's some evidence, and I guess the betas of Mountain Lion, that Apple's going to greatly increase and maybe double the display pixels of all the Macs. And on an iMac, that's going to be pretty spectacular because it's already something, I don't know, like 2700 by over 1000. So we're talking crazy DPI, dots per square inch. So for Retina, it's going to have to be over 300 dots per square inch. So you're going to have, if Apple can pull this off and have the MacBook Airs, MacBook Pros, and the iMacs and the cinema display, or the big display that Apple has, double the pixels, it's going to be profound. And I mean, it's going to have, it might not, at the beginning, it might be kind of annoying because Apple's going to have to figure out a way to make websites scale up to this higher definition of displays if Apple does this. So maybe Apple will have a way to sort of built into the operating system to sort of boost the resolution, or to fake boosting the resolution so it doesn't look jagged or anything like that. So that's going to be probably a big part of the announcement, that that the new Macs, certainly the MacBook Pros, I could see them going to the Retina display, and probably also the MacBook Airs. But imagine if you could do that to like a 27-inch iMac. So that's pretty impressive. The other thing they're probably going to announce is Apple TVs is going to have an upgrade to the iOS, which is the operating system that's similar to that on the iPhone and iPad. And there's going to be a new iOS. And the big thing is probably going to be an SDK for developers to create Apple TV apps. So that's going to be huge. They're going to probably, I wonder if they're just going to roll it in as part of the iPhone, iPad developers program, or are they going to make you join a separate developers program? Right now, you pay $100 a year to be in the Macintosh developers program, and $100 a year to be in the iOS developers program. I wonder if they're going to have a separate developers program for the Apple TV. But this is inevitable. They're probably, going to open up the SDK for apps to run natively on the Apple TV. But here's the thing I think they're going to do. I think they're going to do it so that they're also going to tweak the SDK for the iOS 6 so that iOS 6 apps can control some apps or content that's on your Apple TV. Because right now, the Apple TV acts as a accessory to the iPhone and the iPad, in that you can mirror content onto the Apple TV from the whole device can be mirrored. But rather than having whole apps run separately from the Apple TV, and remember the current Apple TV, the third generation, I think it has like 8 gigabytes of storage. It doesn't have huge amounts of storage. I think what Apple's going to do is create an SDK that allows developers of iPhone and iPad apps to install helper apps to their apps on the Apple TV that would facilitate further using an iPhone or iPad with the Apple TV. So what does that mean? So for example, let's say there's a game on the iPad. Now you can have parts of the game, let's say like there's this racing game where the actual racing you can have be on a track on a big TV, and then other parts of the game are on your iPad. But that counts on like the Wi-Fi, working well and mirroring. But what if Apple said, listen, we can take off some of the bandwidth pressure that is put on through AirPlay by having you install a sister app to the Apple TV that works together with the iPad app, so that the content's already on the Apple TV, but being used together with your gaming app. It could make the experience more robust. And it could also make the responsiveness of these apps that use both that run off the iPad and use the Apple TV, could make it more robust, because it wouldn't have to send over the Wi-Fi a whole bunch of content. The content could already be running, some of it in the app that's on the Apple TV. The other reason I think they'll go this route is because they want people to use their iPhone and iPad with the Apple TV. The remote that comes with the iPhone and iPad to operate the Apple TV is a better remote than the little clicker that you use with the Apple TV. And I bet you that remote gets upgraded and it becomes more useful. So because Apple doesn't want to create apps that you control on your Apple TV with the little clicker. Apple wants you to buy an iPod Touch at the very least, or an iPhone or an iPad to control the Apple TV. So I wouldn't be surprised if that the initial apps that you can put on the Apple TV only work with iPhone, iPad, or iPod Touch devices, that you can control them. Like you can't use them without those devices. So that's going to be, I think, part of the big announcement. And so what kind of apps do you think? I think at the beginning you're going to see gaming apps. Game apps are going to be more robust. Take, for example, the Monopoly game. The board will be on the Apple TV. iPhone and iPads will, all connect to that app and use it and, run things with it. Also, maybe social media apps, Twitter apps. Maybe there's a Twitter interface. There's going to be, maybe there'll be like a Flipboard for the iPad. Maybe Flipboard will come out with a Apple TV version of Flipboard, because Flipboard's a great content consuming app for the iPad, and I could see a different interface for Flipboard on the Apple TV. And maybe there will be a certain amount of apps that can work with just the regular clicker remote that Apple has. So it's going to be, I think it totally makes sense. I mean, the way to sort of capture the television is just to come up with a killer app that has better content than your Time Warner cable box or Verizon Fios box has. Okay, so that's it for this episode 118 of the Apple Podcast. It's all about speculating what's going to be tomorrow at WWDC. Now, tomorrow, after WWDC's first day, I'm going to have my iPad podcast come out. And so listen to that. I'm going to go over the big announcements and as they affect the iPad, the iPhone, and Apple as a whole. So thanks for listening. And see you next week, where I'll just go into regular news about Apple. And remember, this is a chit-chat-free podcast all about Apple.
This has been a Max Future production.